Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're going to be talking about a big topic, and that is typography. Now, where do I even begin? There are so many different things to talk about, but what I want to do is I want to start right at the basics. So let's talk about the different categories of type. Now, the first category is something we're all familiar with, and that is serif typefaces. Now, the first word that comes to mind when I'm thinking about serif typefaces is traditional. Now, the little curls at the end of the letter forms are called serifs. Now, these are these little curls. You'll see them on the edge of the S. You'll see them at the bottom of the R, even on the top of the R. You get the point. Now, serifs are generally used in body copy, and they embody a more traditional feel. Some even say elegant. It really depends on the typeface. Now, even though they have their standard applications, we usually can bend the rules if it needs to suit our need. And you'll see that later on in these lessons. Now, you may be thinking, Daniel, there are so many different types of serifs, and some look so different from each other. And you're definitely right. Serifs are categorized into 4 categories. So let's jump right in. So that first category, or that first subtype, is called old style. Now, old style serifs, these are generally referred to as humanist, or, the oldest typefaces in the classification. And this will date back all the way to the mid 1400s. Now, typefaces in this category include Jensen, Centaur, and Gaudi. Now, we're using Gaudi over here. It's a really nice typeface. The next subtype is transitional. This is a transitional typeface. What we're using here is Times New Roman. Now, Times New Roman, Baskerville, now those are both transitional serif fonts. And one thing you'll notice is the difference between thick and thin lines over here, these strokes. They're a bit more pronounced here if we're going to compare this to, say something like old style. We start seeing a little bit more contrast between those strokes when in comparison, but not as much as modern or Didone. And that is our next subtype. So Didone or modern. And this includes typefaces like Didot, Bodoni. Right here we have Didot. And you can tell that these strokes are very, very contrasting. They're much more pronounced. You'll see them right here in the counters in the O, like in the inside of the E over here, that thick to thin. Up here in the N, you'll see the difference between the strokes on the left side of the M and the far side of the M. So you'll see much more contrast with these types of typefaces. And lastly, we have slab serif. Now, slab serifs, they have little to no contrast between thick and thin lines. You also notice that at the end, their serifs are much more rectangular or boxy. And typefaces in this category, they include typefaces like Archer. We're using Courier over here. And that's going to be it for serif typefaces. So we're going to talk about the next category, and that is sans serif. Now, I love sans serif typefaces. I think a lot of people love sans serif typefaces. They're basically make up a lot of different types of fonts and typefaces that we use today. What does sans serif mean? Well, sans serif, that means without serif in French. They lack those little serif details that we saw in the previous typefaces, and they're much more modern in appearance. Now, there are 4 main classifications of sans serif typefaces. Let's get into that. So let's get into the first one. The first one is called grotesque. What a name, right? Grotesques are the earliest and include fonts like Franklin Gothic and Accidents Grotesque. Really nice typefaces. What we got here is Source Sense Pro, which is a really great grotesque typeface. Their letter forms are pretty similar to some serif typefaces, kind of minusing the serifs. So you'll see a little bit more contrast between the strokes. So there is some thick and thin contrast here, but they just have no serif at the end of the letter forms. Next, we have neo-grotesque. Now this includes some of the most common typefaces like Arial, Universe, and everyone's favorite, Helvetica. Now, when I'm comparing this to, say, something like a grotesque typeface, the one thing I'm looking at is that the neo-grotesque is much more plain in comparison. You'll see that it's much more uniform within the typeface. There's less contrast between thick and thin. Definitely a good comparison between these two. Now, the third is humanist typefaces. Now, this includes Gill Sans, which we're actually using right here, Frutiger, and Tahoma. They're much more calligraphic than other sans serif typefaces, that's for sure. You're probably wondering, what exactly does that mean? So let's take a look. Notice how they have greater variation between different line widths. You'll see that right here in the A, you'll see them in the S, just in the T, you'll see them in the U. So there's definitely much more contrast between different types of line widths. You'll also notice that they're, little swooping A, kind of like it almost has a serif. The little swoop on the T is kind of just arching a little bit more up than we'll see in something like neo-grotesque like Helvetica. And lastly, we have geometric. Now, these are probably my favorite. And this includes Futura, which is an amazing font, and Proxima Nova. Now, geometric sans serifs are more closely based on geometric shapes. What gave that away? If you look at the O, that is definitely just a circle. You can see it even reflected in other letters, like individual letters like C and E. The T is just like a straight stick. Let's compare that to like Gill Sans, where there's that swoop. So that's very calligraphic. If we look at something like neo-grotesque, even though they're very plain in appearance, you'll see that there is a little swoop there. There is a little bit more life to this typeface. This is just like two sticks put together. Almost looks like a cross there. And that G is very circular. You'll notice, like I said, in the O's, very circular. It's always very simple. So now that you know all the different types of categories and classifications for sans serif typefaces, there's some really interesting ways we can use them. And we're going to jump into Figma next. Hey everyone, and welcome back. So we're going to be continuing this basics of typography portion here. And the next type of category we have here for typefaces is display typefaces. Now, you may have heard that before. You may be wondering, wow, this is a typeface. Like, how do I even use something like this? Let's get into that. Now, this includes typefaces like Lobster or Abril. Now, this category is the broadest and includes the most variation, as you can see over here. The most consistent characteristic, though, is that they're generally unsuitable for, body copy, and it's best we kind of, keep these for things like headlines, larger text, maybe even shorter copy for a little brief. Definitely use this if you need to draw attention to something. So like this is Lobster. This is a really nice one. I like it a lot. And you can definitely see this being used in like a website or a marketing website or something like that. Same with something like maybe this one over here. I can see something like this. This is, I think this is a Abril right here. And one great thing about this typeface is even though it is a serif, it definitely has that contrast that is just like very pronounced here. Kind of like a throwback to a Didone or modern serif typeface. You may look at these display typefaces and think, well, that's a serif or a sans serif. And in reality, you're definitely right. Like I mentioned before, they do have serifs, but technically it would still be categorized as a display typeface because you wouldn't use it as body copy. And in this example, you may be thinking, well, how do I use it? Now, this is pulled from Dribbble, and this is by Elzia Arafat, and they do a great job contrasting typefaces here on the web. Let's take a look over here. Now, the display typeface here is very elegant, and there is some extreme contrast between that thick and thin line, you'll notice. You could try to use this as body copy, but it would be really hard to read. I guarantee that. Display typefaces have their use, and this is a great example of that. So you'll see over here used as a headline, like the main hero copy for this kind of landing page. And you'll see over here just as a title. Now, I couldn't imagine using this pretty consistently to typeset like all this copy. It would just be really hard to read, like I mentioned before. But this is still a great example of how you could utilize that, even for the web. And the last category I have is called monospace. Now, you may be thinking, what is monospace? These kind of look like sans serif, and they are variants of sans serif or serif types of fonts. Now, Roboto monospace is one example of a monospace typeface. And these are fixed pitch or fixed width or non-proportional fonts. Its letters and characters each occupy, you'll notice that over here, they'll each occupy the same amount of horizontal space. Narrower characters simply get a bit more spacing around them to make up for that difference. So you'll see like a narrow character like the N, or like a T. I don't have a T over here, but these are pretty similar, and you'll see they still have the same width right across horizontally. You'll notice that they all take up the same amount of space regardless of their letter. These are best used for areas where you want to evoke some sort of technical feeling. Now let's take this for example. Now this is just a simple feature within GitHub where people can collaborate over code reviews. So there's some code here and people are just chatting about it. We got some reactions to that. Pretty cool. Now, monospace fonts have widely been used for coding because of the higher importance of reading the individual characters. Monospace typefaces are used for programming because they are widely believed to be better due to the common treatment of skinny letters and punctuation and alignment. You'll notice that right here in the code that they're reviewing, it's very, very easy to read. Now, if we were to compare that with something like this, when I'm trying to look at each individual letter, where one letter left out could mean the difference between code that works and code that doesn't, it's very important that I have a very legible typeface or a monospace typeface, which would allow me to actually read that in a much more clearer way. It's a very, very functional typeface. And like I said, mostly used by like programmers and within that kind of realm. There are definitely other use cases for it. Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're going to be talking about how do you pick a typeface. But the first thing that comes to mind when I'm thinking about picking a typeface is the emotion of type. Now that may seem like a weird way to think about typefaces because, typefaces can't feel, but they definitely do have their own mood or personality. Now the mood of a typeface is a very important part about how it should be used. You'll notice that some different typefaces have strikingly different moods. Some typefaces are very formal or traditional. Others seem more light and modern. And a lot has to do with the way that typeface has been designed. Sometimes it could be that there's a lot of contrast within that typeface like we saw before. Or sometimes typefaces just have really distinct moods like we've seen in some display typefaces. For example, let's think about Times New Roman. It's pretty much always a traditional font. And some typefaces are a little bit more transcendent. And they can pretty much convey almost any mood. And when I think about that, I think about Helvetica. So when I'm looking for typefaces for a specific brand or purpose, I think about how it could represent that best. Some typefaces could be perfectly suited for a fintech company or a bakery, or like the Swedish furniture company over here that we just came up with before. Typefaces can really help to represent and reinforce the voice of a brand. Now, let's see how we can choose our own typefaces based off of a mood in a couple of different scenarios. We're going to jump right into the Figma in our next lesson.
Hey everyone, and welcome back. We are going to explore typography in a bunch of different ways today. Now, we are going to learn a bunch of stuff. We're going to learn how to strengthen brand with typography. We're going to go through a couple of different mood examples in terms of what you should use for, say, like a consultancy versus what you should use for basic UI examples like this. And we are actually going to learn a bunch about text properties and creating and applying text styles. And we're going to start working on our own typographic system for our own designs. So let's jump right in because it's going to be super fun. Hey everyone, and welcome back. And before we can get into using typography in a bunch of different ways, we need to learn about the text tool within Figma. We're going to learn about text properties right now. So text properties allow you to control everything from the appearance and position of the text. You can even resize. You can, use a bunch of different other features. Let's jump in. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a frame. Let's just start off. And, we're going to just create like a big block here. It doesn't even matter. And we're just going to call this our test. Now, we are going to actually start using the text tool. So I'm going to press T to get my text tool and just click onto the screen. And I'm going to write, something very simple like hello world. And the first thing I'm going to do is let's bump it up in size so that way we can see what we're working with. And we're going to center this right in the middle and let's jump in. Okay, so this is our beautiful, beautiful example text. Now, the different things you can just like work with in terms of the text properties are things like font family. So you can set the font family here. You want it to be like Helvetica. You can do that. If you want it to be something like Roboto, you can do that. Personally, I'm a big fan these days of Inter. I think it's a beautiful font. The other thing that we're going to talk about is, so you've chosen the font family, which is over here. Now you can actually choose the weights. So Inter has like a bunch of different weights. That's why I like it. It's so versatile. You can choose things like medium. You can go to black. You can even have like black, extra bold italic. You have so many different options here. I'm going to stick with our medium for now, or let's just stick with semi-bold. I think that's good. Now, a typeface can have any number of styles and weights. Every font family will come with its own selection of styles, so it's not going to be the same. For example, we've seen like a bunch of different weights in just styles, like the italicized versions. They include things like thin, light, regular, medium, bold, black, and others are just like, a little bit, less expansive, and they just have maybe several different styles to choose from. So if you're looking for a very versatile font, this is one of them, especially for like UI design, super helpful. The other thing we can change in terms of the property is the size, which we illustrated before. You can either just like select it or come in here and select that and edit it directly. You have other things like your actual letter spacing, which is really great. If you feel like this is too spaced out, I can like reduce it to like 2% and it's going to tighten it. And we have our line height, which is really great for all the different, sizing. If we have like, say, let's use our plugin just to illustrate this. We're going to go into Lorem Ipsum, and I am just going to select that text layer, and there we go. And I'm just going to, bring this in a bit. So this is our text layer. Now to illustrate just the line height, if I have 125%, it's starting to space out a bit more. 150, that's really great for things like, larger paragraphs and whatnot. Over here, you have alignment options. You have your horizontal alignments, which is like things like, text align left, text align center, text align right. You also have your vertical align options, which is, so if I drag the size of this box here, I can align it to the center of that box, to the bottom, to the top. Then we have other things like the resizing property. This controls over here. This is going to control how a text layer shrinks or grows to accommodate its contents. There are several settings available. So you have like the auto width, which we saw over here, which is just going to keep on spanning. This is what I usually use. I set a fixed width, but I have an auto height. So it's automatically just going to keep on building, depending on the amount of text I have. You see how that kind of shrinks vertically, right? And then we have like the full fixed version where you've set the height and the width. Now, a great thing that we can do now with Figma is we can go into these advanced options here. You can set a bunch of different things. You can set things like, your resizing is in here, your alignment's in here as well. You can set decoration like underlining, strike throughs. You can have paragraph spacing, paragraph indents. So, you're going to have that first line indented like you're reading a book. And you can also create lists. So you have different list styles now. So just going to come over here, and if you just press enter, you can have another list item. The other great thing is, you can change the type of list style. It can be numbered or it can be just like your unordered list. You can remove it. Just keep in mind that once you remove it, it's gone, and you need to kind of fix the spacing there. And then you can set the case. So I'm going to just select there. You can set the case like this. So we have our uppercase, our lowercase, we have capitalized, and then we have just our, just our regular one right here. So this is just capital, and then, removing it will not give us the case letter anymore. If we wanted to even get like deeper into this, we can go into our details, and you can specify how numbers are viewed here. So if I say like 1991 or something like that, and I can say that this style is, you have different style versions based off of the font. You can make these smaller versions where it's just like superscript, you have subscript, normal. You can have fractions in here. So, there are a lot of different stylistic options, whether it's like variants and stuff like that. So a lot of fonts may not have, an extensive list like this, like Inter does. You can even come into the variable font and set that weight instead of like giving it, like an actual weight, like medium, you can set it to like 540 or 550, which is like this cross between medium and semi-bold. And if you wanted to, you can even like set a slant. Now, I personally don't play around with variables too much, but this is what you can do within Figma. It's pretty extensive. You can do so much with typography in here and just within the text properties. So definitely take a look, get a little comfortable with how to use just like different text properties with layers and different text layers. And then we can start building some pretty cool layouts. Hey everyone, we are going to go through a little exercise together to get a little more comfortable with using fonts, font families, font weights, all the different types of text properties within Figma. And we're going to learn how to elevate a brand. So I often get clients that come to me in a scenario where they just have their logo, they have some colors, they basically only have like one typeface, and they say, okay, we want to basically build a new website, and we want to convey that, we're responsible, we've been around for a long time. I did have a charity come to me one time when I was working as a consultant, and it was very similar to this kind of situation that we're going to play out here. They came to me with just like this type of logo, and it was really plain. If I'm just going to drag that logo, just a text file out here, it was like this, Montserrat was the font. It was very much just Montserrat. They had a couple of body styles, they had a couple of headings, but everything was Montserrat. The thing, though, that we need to really think about here is, well, how do we actually expand upon this a bit more and, get people to really trust them based off of their brand? Don't get me wrong, Montserrat's a really beautiful font, and it's actually really it's a large font family, but we have some options here in terms of how we can expand upon this. So let's just run through a couple different scenarios. Let's just use our Lorem Ipsum plugin to just help us just, sift through some of this content. So I'm just going to take that text file and just paste it outside here. So we're going to use this frame that we have here. And I'm not going to allow this to close. So I'm just going to leave it right there. And let's think of some ways we can have some headings. So I'm just going to generate some words here. So we have this is what they had. And if I were to generate, say, a paragraph underneath here, it'd look something like this. And it wouldn't be semi-bold. It'd be maybe regular, and it would be 16 pixels in size. Oops. There we go. And then, we'd have maybe 150% on its line height. And it's kind of hard to read already. So, the other problem is just not having a large enough color palette to work with. So we're just going to expand this frame. So that way we have more room to play with. I'm actually just going to delete that for now. And we don't need this huge paragraph just yet. I mean, we can have maybe multiple paragraphs or something like that. We could just say 4 sentences, and there we go. So they would have like maybe something like this where there's a couple paragraphs. Maybe there's like a subheading over here. And it wasn't really expansive. So definitely like follow along with me. And, see about like different ways that you can actually, work with typography, just like I am. Another thing that they did have though, like they had like different UI kit options. So they would have like a button and it would say like, this would be the label and we would have 14 pixels. We could wrap this in an auto layout container just by pressing Shift A. And here we go. So I'm moving a little quickly here. And there we go, welcome. And then it would be something like this, like teal with white. So, there's different ways we can handle palettes and, just general typography systems that are very limited like this, where they're only really providing you a bit of couple of headings and some text options. There may be like this smaller text option here that it just doesn't do much. And the way we do that is through two ways. We can do it by creating contrast with color and contrast with typography, and this is how I approach it. Now generally what I like to do is for things like this, I'll actually just search for another font. Like I'll use in this case something like Palatino, which is a nice font. You can also use something like Garamond, which is another nice font. And so already now, like we're starting to see that we're not necessarily throwing away Montserrat at all. We are actually like using this and maybe some color now, like we can bring in color here to create a little bit of a different mood. So if I create another duplicate here, I'm going to right click on this frame and expand it. And I think this is generally fine, this text block. We could maybe bump it down in color a bit just to create, a little bit more contrast between the two. And then, if we do need things like subheadings, we can go into our font details here and we can select like all caps and we can increase the spacing. And there we go. Like we're already starting to create some, nice little changes to this whole design. And if I just bring this down because we don't want this to be super big and bring this over. Oops, that's a little bit too much. We can even bump it down in size so it's not too crazy. And I think the button is generally fine, to be honest. But you notice the difference here now. We have a little bit more of a family of just font weights and font styles working together. And we have a whole different way of, just viewing how this content's going to work. So this one can come up a little bit more. And maybe this one is medium because it's it's that header font. So we've already created a bit more just general contrast between all this content. Another thing is a lot of people forget about some of these different typographic elements that they aren't necessarily thought of from the forefront. But if I were to say, come up with a quote. So I have one sentence that's a big quote. I can really come in here and play around a bit and start bringing some interesting pieces out. And now we've created like this cool little style. Even if we wanted to like say, bring it just like as like something that's dark, or, you know, decrease that type of contrast with that. We could also, you know, bump this up to like a larger heading size. It's all about playing around with, you know, some of the sizes as they work together, working with your base unit size to ensure that you're not necessarily, you know, going over that. And let's just, there we go. That's a larger quote. So I'm just grabbing a larger quote here. And there we go. And we can just like, we can cap this off with bringing one of these down here and just, you know, this was said by John Doe. And there we go. Like, you know, from this to this, like, I feel like, you know, bringing in that serif font really helped us bring it back to that traditional, like, you know, state of trust. Whereas, you know, just the sans serif maybe is just not enough for a brand like this. Whereas, you know, if this foundation that came to me and, you know, they've been around for a long time and they wanted to establish that, you know, we have been around a long time, you should trust us, we're friendly, you know, using some of the colors, even with typography and mixing those together really helps, you know, elevate this brand a bunch. Personally, I think this is like a night and day difference. Hey everyone, and welcome back. I want to talk about a couple of different things here. Specifically, I want to talk about different typeface scenarios. So let's jump in. This is going to be our number one example here where we have this consultancy. Now, this is something I just came up with, but let's dive in. Now, so for the first example here, this consultancy, they're a group of really passionate individuals that are, you know, they're trusted in building software for a variety of organizations. I'm sure many people can think of, you know, different examples here. Now let's go back to how we think about typefaces. When I approached this little branding exercise here, I thought about the type of voice the brand had. This brand wants its potential customers to know that they are friendly, approachable, and knowledgeable. And you can see that I have paired two typefaces over here. These are our two typefaces. We have Merriweather, which is a very nice and clean serif font. It almost blurs those lines between serif and sans serif. And if you're really interested in using Merriweather, they also have a sans serif option, which I mean, I love that typeface as well. I think it's pretty beautiful. So they do have that sans serif and the serif option. I love both of them, to be honest, but I've used the serif font here. And like I said, it has that sense of trustworthiness and professionalism to it. And that's what we're going for with this. The next typeface that I use over here is Source Sans Pro. This is another typeface. And if we go into this font family and we go to see all the different styles it has, I mean, it's pretty extensive itself. And, you know, this is something that I really look for when I'm looking for like UI focused typefaces. Sometimes I'll have a heading specific typeface. Sometimes I'll use just one. Like Source Sans Pro is a good typeface that you can use throughout your entire product. So, you know, don't shy away from that if you really want to. Sometimes I like to create the contrast. It really is dependent on that brand. So this is a really great font family, a clean sans serif that is really great for things like body copy and just labels in general. We even have them up here as the navigation items. Now, if we were to say change like this heading typeface to say, even if we just change it to the sans version of itself, I mean, it doesn't necessarily come across as the same version that we had prior. And, you know, we can even say that we want it to be like Helvetica. I mean, it's okay. It's not that it's bad or anything, but I actually thought that the Merriweather version was just, you know, it just had a little bit more life to it in terms of the different shapes of all the different elements within the typeface. So personally, that's kind of the direction I went into, and that's why I really loved this font family for this. Now, that's all great for, that's all great for things like products, websites, etc., just software in general, and, pairing typefaces. But sometimes, when we get into the really nitty gritty details of, how things should work when you're using typefaces with like things like UI, an example being an input where, we have 3 different instances. We have like a label, we have text, the content within, and then we have this like message. We need to ensure that the font family that we're going to choose to do this is going to be versatile. It's going to have some weights that we can use. It's going to look really great at smaller font sizes. And, those weights are going to help us just make sure that, it's legible, readable at those smaller font sizes. Now, if we look over here, we have like an error message for a form element. When we think about the content of an error message, we need to think about how that should impact our user. An error message should be direct, it should be plain, and it should be straight to the point since we want a user to fix the error. So this is like an actual scenario. Not just the fact that we need people to understand the input, in the sense of like before its error state, but when we have certain scenarios where there's, a user action needs to be done, the typefaces that we choose here are going to really help us, get that point across. They need to be readable and legible. And the other thing is, especially with like an error message, the typeface that we choose really needs to reflect the seriousness of that message. If we were to think of this as a real life interaction, if you had an issue with an online purchase at one of your favorite stores and asked for help, I'm 100% sure they wouldn't respond in a jokingly or, an over casual manner. Like they wouldn't be like, hey, what's up, buddy? Hold up, we're going to fix that. They would probably say something along the lines of, hello, sorry to see you are having an issue. Let me fix that for you. And a typeface can really help reinforce that type of messaging. Like the example prior, let's contrast that with another typeface that's a bit more fun. We can see that there really isn't a sense of seriousness if we do that. So if we grab something that's a little bit more, funky, Gil Sans is a little bit more funkier, and it's not that it's bad or anything. This is actually, it can pass, but now we're starting to get into issues of like, okay, this is a little bit harder to read now. And if we, go off the board and, do something like not Comic Sans, that's just a little too much. Let's see what we can find here. There is Comic Sans as an option just to show the total contrast. But you can see over here, like you wouldn't pick a font family like this to display that. There's a lot of different options out there. The other thing is, you wouldn't even pick a typeface that's just way too like contrasting even if in its own right. This is, Garamond. We also have things like Bodoni, which is lots of thick and thins over here, hard to read. Kind of just doesn't suit this scenario at all. And then if you want to really go that route of like seeing, Comic Sans, like that just looks, playful. And that's not what we're going for here. We can see that this really isn't helping us with showing like a sense of seriousness here. And it doesn't look like the type of response I would get from a serious establishment. Typefaces really possess an emotion or a mood. And by using this type of methodology, you now will be able to distinguish the type of impact a typeface can have on the perception of a brand. Hey everyone, welcome back. We are going to be talking about Google Fonts. So if you're using Figma, Google Fonts is pretty much already loaded into Google Figma, so you don't need to download the files or anything like that. What I like to use Google Fonts for is to just search for different types of fonts. Now, I'm looking for different font families here, and you can toggle these off to be like serif, sans serif, display, handwriting, monospace fonts. An example is like, let's look for a serif font here. I'm actually thinking about designing for our own product. And if I'm thinking about, the different types of pairings that I would like, I'm definitely looking maybe to pair with a serif and a sans serif. I think that would really look nice. It would elevate that brand a bit more, make it seem like not posh, but a little bit more elite. And also it's kind of bringing that traditional sense back to that screen, which I like to play with around a bit. So we have the serif options here. You can filter by the type of language. You can also filter by the properties. Definitely want something with like a bunch of styles, maybe like at least 6 for like a heading typeface. In terms of thickness, I think it needs to have, once again, if it's going to be a heading, it needs to be, have the ability to get a little thicker so it can stand out a bit. I don't care too much about slant and width right now. You can also get into variable fonts if you really want to, set those settings within Figma. You can type something in here. So something more online with our brand, like find the things you love. There we go. We see Merriweather, Roboto Slab, Bitter. These are really nice fonts, actually. And then we can adjust the size. So we can, sort it also by trending, most popular, newest, name, etc. So if I'm going to go into one to just give you an example, like Martel is another really great font that we have available to us. It's kind of like bordering a little bit of this serif, sans serif. It's not too harsh in terms of the serifs that it has. If we just expand it a bit. So it's really, really nice. It's a bit modern. And you can get into things like type testing if you want to see how it looks like as a heading. You can select those options and so on. So really great. And you can also just download the font family if you really want the font files. So if I'm going to look through here, I'm looking for something that has a little more exciting. So let's see, number of styles, maybe the thickness needs to come down a bit. So we have Garamond. That one is a pretty nice font, but I think some of the letter forms are a bit too much, especially like with the R's. Like I'll show you what I mean here. If I just type in R, like they have that long tail that comes out through here. I'm a super big fan of that. I do really like Laura. Laura's also a variable font. It has a bunch of different styles. So we have the regular, medium. We also have semi-bold, bold, and I think like maybe we would use something like semi-bold for a lot of things, or medium. Really nice font. It's a little chunky. It kind of gives that like, that kind of like the old style, like reading and just like traditional headlines that you would find like in like a newspaper or something like that. So I'm actually really, really liking this font, and that's something I'll probably bring in when we start exploring our typographic system. And this is Google Fonts. So definitely use this to search for new fonts, see what you like, play with the type tester to see if it's going to suit your needs. And it's just an easy way to visually see a lot of fonts on screen at the same time. Whereas in Figma, it's kind of harder, and you need to sometimes use certain plugins just to find a font that looks nice. Whereas when you're searching a font family directly from Figma, you can't really see what you're choosing. You'd have to actually know the type of font that you'd want. So I would definitely start here if you don't want to use a plugin. Hey everyone, and welcome back. So we did a bunch of font exploration before, learning about, ways we can find fonts, how to use them in different scenarios. Now we are going to work on our own typographic system. We're going to find things like, the types of font families we're going to use for our headings and for our body copy. And this is just so we can explore. Nothing is going to be set in stone here. So let's jump right in. So I'm just going to grab a bunch of different types of font families that I'm going to look at for both the heading and for the actual like body copy and UI and all the rest of the stuff. So let's jump in. So I'm going to use a text tool, and what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, let's just bump that size up to like 24. And okay, so we have something in there. I'm going to go into my plugins, get yourself lorem ipsum if you didn't already get it. And we are definitely not going to use Comic Sans. For now, I'm going to generate two things. I'm going to generate 2 sentences let's actually generate more than that so we can get, just a good sense of like what a little bit of a paragraph could look like. So let's generate something like maybe 3 sentences. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to bring that in here. Perfect. And I'm going to duplicate that layer up there. And I'm going to just find the stuff you'll love. Okay. That's what we're going to do. These are going to be my heading variations, and this is going to be my body copy. So I can actually bring this down to something like maybe 16 pixels. And I'm going to actually duplicate this a bunch so that way I can find whatever pairing is going to work best for us and for me. I mean, yours may be different and you can change it. Definitely you can change it. So the different pairings that I personally like, so I mentioned Martel. That's a really nice one. Has a nice bold. What else is there? So that's a nice heading. Oops. I'm just going to make duplicates. There we go. There was Laura. I liked Laura a lot actually, and I think I'm already heading in that direction. Then we have Merriweather, which is another really solid font. And then what else we have? I think we should probably explore like maybe Garamond. So, we'll stick with that for the headings. For the body copy, this is what I usually do. I just basically come in here and I say, okay, these are my headings. So I'll just like maybe rename these all to headings. And then these ones, I'll just call them body. And so, I'll just grab some fonts here. So I have Open Sans, which is a really great one. And then I'm going to make a bunch of copies. So I have Open Sans. What else is there? I like Lato. That one's a really nice one. We have Roboto. We have Source. Sans Pro. And then, you know what? I'm going to throw in Inter because that's another great one too. So now we have a bunch of different fonts, font families for these various, types of applications, I would say. Sometimes I'll even grab a button. So I'll grab this and, just to think about UI elements, and I'll just say button label. And I'm going to click that button label. So it's clicked and Shift A. And I'll just say this is a button. And we can just leave the button to be, we can make it black or we can make it white. This is the first step though, just like getting some stuff out there. So this one was that button. What do we do here? We have Lato. What else is there? This one's Roboto. And I'm going to show you what I usually do when it comes to just choosing a typeface. We got Source Sans Pro, and then we have the Interfont. Okay, perfect. So we have a bunch of fonts here, and we fix that. Okay, some big fat buttons. Nice. Okay. So this is where we're going to stop for now. We have our layout of just a couple of different variations here. I think we can actually bump these up to, say, maybe 32, and then we can get going. Hey everyone, and welcome back. So I am going to take a look at these individual font families first before I start making my decision. Maybe we'll weed out a couple. So let's start with just the headings on the right here. So we have Martel, which has it has actually a couple different styles. I don't think I'm going to use italics. Then we have Laura, which has 4 8 styles in total with italics. We have Merriweather, which is the same. And then we have Garamond, which is 10 in total. Now, just based off of the type of brand our product is, let me just say that I think we want it to be a little bit fun. And right now, like, I feel like there's just too much contrast, especially with Garamond, with the top and bottom. And this is very, I'm getting serious vibes from this typeface. So I'm actually going to snuff this one out and not use it. So I'm just going to delete it. When I look at Merriweather, Merriweather does fall into that line, but I'm getting some it is kind of blocky and very, very, if you look at like just some of the letter forms here, like the way even the Y cuts off, it's very blocky and very serious, I would say, in a way. I like it, but I don't know if it's going to suit the brand. The one thing I do really like about, all the fonts, font families that are left is that, things like the D, it's popping up, like the X height of these letters, they're not as low as like Garamond was. The one thing I don't like about Martel, though, is the same thing I don't like about Merriweather. I think it's a little bit, there's not enough contrast yet between the letter forms of like a sans serif and a serif. You can even tell here, they don't really have any serif. It's more of like a slab serif, if you will, especially Merriweather. So I'm actually going to choose Laura. Like, I like these. It kind of has a little bit of personality, especially with these curves. It's nice. It's still a throwback to some of these serifs with these balls on the end. And that's kind of what I'm going for over here. So I'm going to choose that. At the end of the day, this stuff is kind of subjective. And, how we interpret these font families, I mean, obviously, there's not much difference between all these three, and it's going to come down to personal preference. So, lead with that at the end of the day. But, this in comparison to like Garamond, there was a big difference in terms of like what it's going to convey when you put that on a screen. And we'll get to that. When it comes to the actual paragraph copy, now I'm looking for a lot of versatility. So yeah, we're definitely getting that with things like Open Sans, Leto. What else do we have here? Roboto. Like Roboto's huge. I'm actually just straight up going to delete Roboto right out of the gate. I mean, it kind of reeks of Android, and it's a little condensed and really serious in its letter forms. It's really narrow. There's not a lot of space in terms of width. So we don't need that one anymore. So Source Sans, I think, kind of falls to the same issue here. It's a narrow font. Some of the letter forms here are pretty serious. Like they're really, narrow, almost kind of like condensed a bit. So I think we are going to get rid of that one. And right now it's a little bit of a tie between Inter, we have Leto, and we have Open Sans. So like, again, like these aren't as narrow as some of the other ones that we were looking at. They're a little more wider. I think I'm going to get rid of Leto because there's almost like this weird cross between, if you look, like the letter forms aren't all equal in width, and it's kind of like, that's fine, but I mean, it's almost mimicking the serif letter forms, whereas like, a typical sans serif like Open Sans and Inter, they're pretty uniform in their width in through the letter forms. So I do want to keep that contrast, and I think we can actually get rid of this one as well. So as you can see, like I'm just kind of going through each and every one of them and really trying to choose what I think is going to be like, the big competitors. And I think we're going to explore these two. I mean, I'm probably just going to make a choice here. When it comes to Open Sans is a nice font, but once again, it suffers kind of what Leto suffers from in terms of, the G is very reminiscent of a typical serif G. And, little things like that. And even like the T as well, like we kind of have this like little slope here, which is reminiscent of, the serif T's that we're going to find, over here. So I think I'm going to choose Inter and Laura to go with, and you can swap that, but let's put them together and see how they work. Because like at this point, maybe I'm wrong, but I actually kind of like this. Like it looks really nice if I, put them together and press like Shift A. We have our auto layout frame. Say I want to, make a card, and let's it's actually like it's looking pretty cool, and I'm actually really digging it. I think this is something we can actually use. It gives me a lot of variation with the headings. I can even mix and match headings with sans serif and serif. It gives me great flexibility in terms of just like the typeface when it comes to all the different types of styles I can use within body copy, labels within buttons, labels within inputs. So this is the route I'm going to go, and we're going to build this out next.
Hey everyone, and welcome back. So now we're actually going to start building out a bit of a system, so we have a little bit of structure, and we can start, using these variations of like these font families in a bit more flexibility. So let's just move this over. I mean, we really don't need it anymore. I'm going to keep it there. Okay, so we have Laura here. I'm going to delete these two because I chose Laura and I chose Inter. So let's get to it. Let's start with headings. So based off of like just, going up that 4-8 scale, it really depends on the type of headings I'm going to have. So I like to give myself a little versatility. Like I said, this can possibly change later, but I'll do something like I'll give anything for headings. I'll give like a line height of 125%. So that way they can stack on one another nicely like this. So you have that spacing between. So I'm just going to leave it like that. And the only thing I'm going to change here is I'm going to start just building out like a header 1, a header 2. I'll probably go up to like maybe like header 5. So I have like a lot of options. On mobile, I'm generally not going above like 40 pixels in size for a heading. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, duplicate that and just, duplicate it all the way down just by using Command or Control D. And then I'm going to go, 32 pixels, I think is a good part right here. You don't want to have like a 40 and then like a 36 because there's just not going to be enough contrast between the two. Like as you can see, you might as well not even do it. So 32, and then I'm going to go to 24, and then I'm going to go to maybe 18, and my final heading would probably be around 14. So there we go. We have our headings, and I think, that's going to be good for now. We'll just leave it at that. I would call this like our body or our paragraphs. This is going to be like our copy for that. And for this, I'm going to just make sure that it's like a similar width to what we have up here for now. And I'll probably make just 3 different sizes and maybe a couple variations within those sizes. So once again, I'm using like 150% for the height here. You can use something like 125 if you feel like that's something that's more in line with, what you want to use. I like to use 150. And this is what I'm going to do. What I generally do with like body copy, I really don't go above 16 pixels. So I'm just going to keep it like that at 16 pixels. And then I'm going to have one at regular. And then I'm going to have, one maybe at like semi-bold or medium. So that way there's like, there's different variations of the two because we may need both. So I'll do that. I'm going to take both of those, duplicate them, and drag them. And I'm going to do that again. So I am going to select these. Now that they're both, I have like the medium version and then the regular version. I'm just going to select both of those and just change the font size. So I'll just go 16 and then I'll go 14. And then I will go with this one just 12. So I have a smaller body copy. Not that I would use this too much.
So, but I just want the option. Oops. Okay. So there we go. We basically have our, our styles. And I think the last thing that I haven't really thought about is making labels. So what we can do is we can take these three and drag them down. I'm holding Option while I'm dragging those. I'm just going to distribute them neatly and then bring them closer. So now that I have these three labels, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to write label on each of them. And I'm probably going to use maybe, it's either going to be regular or medium. I mean, we can even do at this point, we can also go ahead and say, okay, we need a regular version and a medium version or a semi-bold version for that label for this one. And I'll just probably repeat these as well for the other sizes. So I have a semi-bold. And you may be asking me, like, why am I doing this? And it's because that, when we're thinking about, designing for software and screens, like, the one thing that graphic designers do is they come up with typographic systems for, posters and things like print in general, like editorial design and stuff like that. But we have to think about like different types of use cases. Not that it's harder or, less excruciating in terms of like how long it may take, but we have different use cases. Like we have to think about labels, like UI elements like that, labels for forms, labels for buttons, placeholders and all that kind of stuff. How does text and, and your color palette work together as you build those out? So I'm already thinking about like UI elements at this stage. And the one thing I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to set these UI elements to 125% because, if we do have like a note that we have to put in there, maybe 150% is too much for like a note in terms of the height. Or if we have like, a button label, I think that's fine for the spacing when we just have like a label within there or even a label above a form. So we've already created some sizes. And yeah, I think this is enough variation, at least for now. Hey everyone, and welcome back. So we are in the typography system page over here in our file and our resource. Now this is what you're basically going to get right now. I'm not going to really go into like the nitty-gritty details of how to create this. I mean, it is just a bunch of rows where we have like a row over here and we have a container with like the different style elements or like the different properties that we have here. But I'm going to actually explain why I want this row and just, started creating something a little bit more well-defined. Now, we had these different sizes over here that we created. I took them and copied them into here. I also actually just displayed the font families because, it's nice to just kind of see what exactly we have here in terms of like the our headings and like our UI font. I think just it's a really nice way to just display them and just to see what you have available to you. Right now, we're really only using 3 different variations here between regular, medium, and semi-bold. We may go into bold sometimes. Same with like the font families here, with all the font weights here, we're probably just going to be using semi-bold the majority of the time. So, I mean, we have these others available to us, but I mean, we can keep it really simple and not have to, move around too much. So let's jump in. So with the headings, like I said, like I had the 40, 32, 24, 18, and the 14. We can even go even lower to 12, but I don't think I'll ever use it at 12. At that point, I'll probably just use our UI fonts because it's just a little bit more legible and readable at that size. Now, I've specified the different types of properties on every single one of these things, whether it's a heading, label, or body element. So I have a name. So I just came up with a name like an H1, very semantic, just in line with code. You don't need to do that just yet. I like to do it just to give you a sense of like what we're working towards. We also have things like, the weight that I'm using just to remind myself. We have the pixels and we have the line height. So these are the settings for headings. And then when we go to body copy, once again, I am using, like I said, regulars and mediums all the way from 16, 14, and 12, all at 150%. This is going to be used for anything that are paragraph based, anything in regards to, using it for like maybe a card. If you have like a registration, you need to explain certain things like a registration question. So definitely for forms and stuff like that, this is gonna, come in really helpful. And it's gonna be really helpful for us and to just use that really quickly. Once again, same type of convention. If anyone's ever used anything like base CSS or tachyons or Tailwind, they have pretty similar naming conventions for styles and variables and whatnot, and even styles or CSS classes. Then we have our labels. And so this is very much similar to our body copy area, but now we're using regular and semi-bold for it, and we are just shrinking the line height. Now you may be thinking, oh my God, like there's so much variation here. Yeah, there is and there isn't. We are obviously, I think we won't go beyond this as we use it. But, you should come up with something that's, you have a little bit of variation to use. You don't want to get stuck and feel like, you don't have enough variation in your styles, in your typographic styles. And you just want to have the right style used for a certain scenario. So if I'm using this for like a button label or, form stuff, that's what I'm going to use. I'm going to use these labels. Anything in regards to, copies of text, descriptions, reviews, all that kind of stuff, that's going to go with a body. And anything that is generally a heading, I'm going to come to this area. So definitely take a look at this. See if you want to, plug and play your own into here. You could just copy and paste your own styles and then, swap them out. But this should give you a really good foundation as we move forward. Hey everyone, we are going to be jumping into our type system here, but I want to teach you a couple of things. So now that we have this system that you can use as just like a template for your own system, or you can just use my own right here, the one that I created, we can actually start making typography styles. And you may be asking, like, what are those? So just like grid styles, color styles, effect styles, there's so many different types of styles, but you can create type styles. So text styles are really going to help you, just understand and reuse like the different, elements that you have within your system here. I'm going to show you how to do that. Let's jump right in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go to my very first style here. Now, this is going to be my heading style. Now, I'm going to go to this little box and I'm going to click it. And then I'm going to press Create Style. Here, I'll be able to just name that style. So I'm going to use the convention of headings. And then I'm just going to say H1. I think we can give some other type of description if we want to. I don't think that's really needed. We can do the same thing for this one. Go in, say headings, and we'll call it H2. Oops, I'm just going to capitalize it. I'm actually going to come down here now and do the same for this, but I'm going to call this body, and I'm going to say 16 pixel, because now we have variations within sizes. So I'm going to say 16 pixel regular. So, you find out what you think is something that you want to use. This is like the type of conventions I'll use. I'll use like 16 pixel regular, just based off of like the types of weights I'm using. And let's do another one. This is just a good way to, just get used to creating styles. So we have body, What's another thing here? We have 16 pixel, and we can say this one is, we can just call it bold. It is kind of bolded. I'm going to go into this one, and this is going to be the last one I'll create for just body, just to showcase. And this one's 14 pixels, and it's going to be regular. And there we go. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom out, and I'm going to click onto the canvas. Now I can see all my text styles. I have my body styles. I have, it has the new folders underneath them that are labeled by the actual size. Interesting things here. It shows me the size, and it also shows me the percentage of the line height. So you can come in here, you can edit that style if you want. You can edit all those properties. And yeah, feel free to do that. But the great thing about styles is that if I say create like a frame and I have some text, I'm going to use like the Lorem Ipsum text plugin. I'll bring that over here so we can see. And I'm going to choose that plugin, and I'm just going to generate 3 sentences. Perfect. I'm just going to resize that. So now I can just go into here and select, okay, I want the regular body copy for that. It's going to show there. Sometimes we are going to be designing and like doing some visual exploration. That's why things are going to change pretty often. I mean, they shouldn't change too often, but I mean, they may change. And you may find that, hey, this is just, a little strict, and I need to, update this a bit, and I want to play around with it. Instead of like updating the style on the fly, which could happen, but in the other case where you just want to play around, you detach that style, and then you can fool around with it. Say like, hey, I don't want the -3%. I want it to be a little bit more wider in style. So, maybe that will work. If I just go back before I detached it, I can say, hey, I want to actually make that 0%. So it's going to just do that across the entire board. And you don't have to do that for every single one. But you should probably do it while you're playing around with it just to see, so you don't get into a situation where you've edited styles and you really can't go back, or at least you don't know where the original point that you started from. So if we were to like put in a headline, we can do the same. And there we go. That's how you use styles within Figma. You can actually, publish these styles. If you have like components and you are a free user within Figma, you won't be able to publish the components. You'll only be able to publish the actual styles. So you can do that. There's also a pretty neat plugin called Style Manager. Let's see right here. That'll allow you to use styles across different types of files. So you can, I can say export all styles. I can, select a new collection. And I can export that collection. And say if I open up a new file over here, because sometimes styles just won't, move across different pages, or sorry, not different pages, but different files. And you may be left wondering like, what the heck happened? Like I can't access my styles. Because if I look here and I click on the canvas, my styles aren't here just because I published them. What I can do is I can, open up that plugin, Style Manager. And I can say, okay, I'm going to go to my library and I have my type styles, and I can import all my type styles. And there you go. Like I have my headings and my body. I can, move them around up here. I can create folders if I need to. I can add new folders. You don't have to write them in the naming conventions, but now I have all my styles here that are from that library, and I can update if I need to, and so on. So definitely get this plugin if you're moving across different files. And that is how you create type or text styles within Figma.